Hey everybody, Adam here, pastor at Ventura Reformed. Ventura Reformed is a new church in the city of Ventura, and you can find out more information about us on the web at venturareformed.org. And in our last video, we talked about the question of God. The church is obviously about God. Our church is about God. Does God exist? What are people's different ideas and conceptions about who God or the gods are? And if there is a God or gods, how do you know that that's true? Can you know? Those kind of questions. And by the way, if you didn't watch that video, you want to go back and watch that one to make more sense out of this one. And also later you can find all of our videos as we post them. We'll archive them on our YouTube channel. So just go to our YouTube channel, check that out, and come back here. But where we left off was with Jesus' conception about God, his answers to the questions of God's existence and who that God is and how you can know him. And it was Jesus' view, among other views, that we talked about. Jesus was a teacher in the Middle East, lived about 2,000 years ago, and he had a definitive understanding of or answers to those questions. Where we left it was just saying that Jesus believed and taught that God is the someone who does not depend on anyone or anything else for anything at all, because he has life in himself. He lives forever and ever in the past. He's the source of life. And anything else that exists goes in the category of creation. So God, according to Jesus, is a whole other category of being that has always existed. And whether something else than that existed in times that are past from our perspective today, or in the present time today, or in the future, whether it's things we could see and sense, or mysterious things, invisible things, whatever, if you believe in those, God is a whole different category of being than all of that. All that's under the category of creation. God is the creator above it. This was Jesus' idea about God. Obviously, he believed this God existed. Jesus also believed and also taught this through his representatives, and also himself grew up reading about this from the first volume of the Christian Bible, it's called today, the Old Testament. So Jesus was studying this when he was a youth, but he believed that this God not only existed but also showed himself, so that this God displayed himself to the people that he created. And he did that a couple ways. We're not going to talk about one of the ways, which is through the Bible, we call it today, the Christian scriptures. We'll talk about that another time. But also, Jesus believed and taught, and his representatives believed and taught, that God showed himself through the things that he made. So that if you wanted to know who God is, you could see him displayed, if you want to say it that way, through the creation. So the creator leaves his mark on the creation, and so you know. It's kind of like if you wanted to know if yeast existed in dough, you could look at the lump of dough that was on the counter, and if over time you saw the dough rising, the creation had some characteristics that signaled that there was yeast in there. I mean, you wouldn't see the yeast, but you would see dough that was rising, and so you would deduce, oh, okay, I get it. I mean, there must be yeast in that dough. Same idea with, or similar idea with God, that you can see God showing himself through the creation. God is invisible, but by looking at the creation, you can see some things about God. The Apostle Paul, I think we read it last time, one of Jesus' authorized representatives, he was writing to the ancient Christian church in the city of Rome in Italy, and he said, "For what can be known about God is plain to humanity, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes," meaning who he is, his character, the things about him, specifically, namely, his eternal power and his divine nature. So the fact that he has life in himself, the fact that he is God, by the definition that Jesus taught us, his eternal power and his divine nature just means his being God. These things have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. It's a fairly simple idea. The obvious way to think about this is like the natural realm. And some people find this basic idea persuasive and obvious and true. Curious if you're one of those people. In other words, a person who says, why look out at the beauty and the complexity of the universe, particularly the natural world, and I see that it gives, that itself is an evidence of an unbelievably powerful, almighty creator, and who is beautiful and brilliant, who could produce this kind of just extraordinary nature that we experience and that we behold. And Psalm 19 has this idea, says, the heavens declare the glory of God, the sky above proclaims his handiwork. It's talking about the day sky and the night sky. And if you look out at the beautiful blue sky in the day, lined with clouds, and if you go out at night and you gaze upon the expanse with the stars and the moon, then the presence of those things, it just causes you to wonder and be amazed, and points to that unfathomably, really, a brilliant and powerful creator that made them. Day to day pours out speech, the psalm says. Night to night reveals knowledge. Now there is no speech, there are their words whose voice is not heard. Their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the ends of the world. And basically what that's saying is, again, even though you can't, if you look up at the night sky, for example, you don't hear an audible voice saying, God made me, but the presence of it is so moving that it's as if it is speaking to us, telling us, yes, God exists, he made us. And it's not just the presence of those things, and it's also their processes. In them he has sent a tent for the sun, which comes out like a bridegroom leaving his chamber, and like a strong man runs its course with joy. Its rising is from the end of the heavens, circuit to the end of them. That's talking about the sun, which we describe it today as rising in the east and setting in the west. And from our perspective here on earth, it looks like it comes up on one side of the sky and goes all the way across the other side of the sky. We also describe it more from a broader perspective as the earth is rotating around the sun. Incredible dynamic processes in nature. It's not just that nature is there, but all the grand ways in which nature moves. Sometimes we call them natural laws, the way they work together, the order and a precision. It's not only the grand things, but the small intricate things, like the way the human body works, and the mysteries of how the immune system holds together, how the blood flows, whatever it might be, from great expanse of small things. It's all part of the natural realm, testifying to the beauty of God through its processes, and even the power that we see in nature, nothing hidden from its heat, whether it's the power of the heat of the sun, whether it's the power of shifts in the climate, whether it's the power of viruses in a pandemic, whatever it is. It's a little pointer, a little speech there to the God behind it, who is powerful enough to create it and to direct it as it goes. Again, some people find this very persuasive, very obvious, and very true, that the natural realm testifies to its creator. I guess I wanted to say that if that's you, it's interesting to ask the question whether or not we live consistently with what we believe and what we think about the power of God and the existence of God who's displayed himself in the natural world. We talk to people all the time who say that they believe in God, and they have some conception of God that's along these lines. He's the one who created everything. He's the one who has life in himself. He doesn't depend on anyone or anything. And maybe they don't have all the details worked out in their mind and heart about who he is and what he wants and things. But just that in and of itself, doesn't it seem like there are implications that if this God is true and if he exists, and you seem to be basically persuaded of it, that you should live consistently with that? What I mean by that is simply like, what is the public and private program that we have set in our lives that would reflect that we actually believe this God exists? I mean, I'm thinking about, like, this God creates us, this God demonstrates his breadth and beauty, then this God is not just another person, or even a more extraordinary person or celebrity, or a wise person who should be listening to. This is God. God should be worshipped. Should be not public things. Who are the people that you gather with to worship God, to revel in the mysteries of this being who has given us life and has given a testimony of himself in extraordinary ways in the world that we live in every single day. And so I just ask, who are you gathering with publicly to worship God? You could always join us to do that, or go back to a church that you know to join that chorus. But not just publicly, privately too, of course. I mean, if he's the one who gives us life, and we'd expect there are certain standards and expectations that he would have, then privately, Am I praying to him? If I have others I live with or a household, do I help to teach them the basic truths about God? Do I pray to him? Do I look for the ways in which I can understand him more? Maybe through the Bible if I believe that, which again I said we'll talk about later. So kind of what public and private program is consistent with somebody who is persuaded that they have basic convictions about God. There's people, a lot of people today, I think it's true, isn't it? Say, yeah, I believe in God. But you wouldn't know it by the fact that they don't gather publicly to worship him with the fame and the honor, the public honor even that he deserves. And maybe they struggle with kind of ordering their life in a way that's consistent with that conviction. And listen, for any of the reasons that I'll mention now, as far as I go and our group at Ventura Reformed, you're welcome to come and meet us. We're going to be honest about the ways in which we struggle to be consistent with that conviction too. A lot of things could be going on. You know, you say you believe in God, but you're not sort of aligned basically with it. One thing is, today the reality is we just kind of go along with the flow of post-Enlightenment society and secularism. And those are kind of big ideas, but what I mean by that is something pretty simple. There was a shift in the way people thought about God and about what you could know. And this is the 18th century, so the 1700s, where basically for the first time in human history, people grew very confident in being able to understand basic truths in life and be able to get along in life in a good way just by relying on what they could sense, like with their five senses, and the ability for them to systematize and sort of logically work those things out in their own mind. So, and you're saying, what did you just say? What I'm saying is this, like basically we go along in life and we rely on our own senses and we rely on our own thinking. But that's a pretty new thing in the history of the human race, that we think we can live a good life by just trusting our own instincts and trusting our own senses. And that's how we know what's true, that's how we know what's good, and that's how we could plan for a good future and all that kind of stuff. So I think, God is pretty much cut out of that equation. You don't really need God if you could kind of figure it out all yourself. And even if you say you believe in God, it's kind of the way the world runs, at least the part of the world that we live in, you kind of just marginalize him, set him off to the side, maybe don't think about it as much, and it's easier to get away with that. Secularism, same thing. The idea of God is scrubbed out of a lot of our cultural whatever dynamics or institutions. God is not even necessarily mentioned. If he is mentioned, it's maybe just a tip of the cap to the past when more people believed in that. And so it's kind of easy to slip into this, even if you if somebody asks you, if you had to lay it down, I believe in God, it's easy to kind of live in a way that doesn't rely upon God or doesn't really affect our lives in a way. Other things, some are a little bit more indicting, I think. The good life sometimes deceives us. What I mean by that is if we got enough money, we got enough comfort, we got enough access to medicines and healthcare, we got enough friends, we got enough fitness, then if we can kind of pursue those things, we can kind of simplify life and get lured into thinking that that's kind of the point of life, is to amass wealth and to have an inner calm and to keep out anything, I don't know, that seems to conflict or that's a little bit bothersome or that brings obligations that, make us a little bit uncomfortable. And so, yeah, in a way, like our wealth and our comfort and our fitness, and especially in the part of the world, the part of California that we live in, the beautiful weather in Ventura here on the Oxnard Plain, Camarillo, Oxnard, Ventura, Carpinteria. I mean, you can find some pretty good patterns, pretty comfortable patterns, but yeah, if you believe in God, confess God, then he's still here too, and he's higher than all of these gifts that he's made. And so yeah, it has to fit in somewhere, and sometimes that stuff deceives us into thinking everything's fine and we don't have any other obligations outside of our own comfort. So that's something that we're all tempted by, I think, the more that we have and the more comfortable that we are. The other thing that happens though too is maybe you're discouraged in life, you're having a hard time. A lot of people have a hard time. Oftentimes people don't know that you have a hard time and you're being neglected by the people who are comfortable. And we're certainly sympathetic with that. But one of the things that happens if you have some struggles, if you have some struggles in your health, if you have some struggles in your relationships, I think there's a lot of people out there, they look around and think everybody else has, things all together, things got it going, but you're kind of odd and you don't feel like you fit in. I'm going to tell you, first of all, you're not alone. A lot of people feel that way. But one thing you got to watch out for is whatever difficulties you're having in life, whatever sadnesses and stresses and trials, you don't want those to drag you away from God either. Because one of the things is we get overly discouraged and fail to realize that God is more powerful than any of our difficulties, and you can find peace and joy and trust Him to take care of you and lead you in the good life, even through difficulties. I mean, for what it's worth, we want to be the kind of people at Ventura Reformed, along with a lot of other churches, where they care for the people who are having a hard time and want to encourage you with the truth of who God is, and so that you can experience like we have a lot of peace. Not that we always have great circumstances, because certainly not, but there is hope available to you. You're convinced that God exists. Like, go to Him and ask Him to help you, because He is a source of joy, and He's somebody that can uplift you. You don't get stuck down there in the mud. One other thing I want to mention before I move on here is sometimes we just feel guilty because we've not lived consistently with the God that we believe exists. I mean, it could be that we grew up in church and we just drifted and we're, apart from Him. Or it could be we have a strong sense of God, but we haven't been living in ways that are appropriate. And so then we think it's kind of too late for us, or God will never accept us if we take a step toward Him, that kind of thing. But that with God, He's not like us. We give up on each other all the time. We judge each other in that sense, like you're beyond redemption, and there's no hope, there's no forgiveness for you. You're a loser. That's how we treat each other. That's even how we treat ourselves sometimes. But God's different. God's not like us. With God, as long as you're alive, there is always tomorrow with God. He is forgiving. He is loving. He is compassionate. And if the worship of God and your personal program of following God in a way that would honor Him, if you've gotten away from that and you're feeling too distant to find your way back, just know you don't have to be stuck there. Ask Him for forgiveness and ask Him for help to get up off the floor and get back in the game. Come see us at Ventura Reformed, meet us, sing to God with us, even like I have it on the screen, Psalm 19. I quoted that because one of the reasons is Jesus used to sing that song when He grew up. We sing the Psalms all the time. These are songs that Jesus sang. He sang them in Hebrew in the time He grew up, and we sing them in English, right, in translation today. But very simply, we're people obviously that are convinced that God exists and that God should be publicly worshipped. So we try to help each other do that and show up together and sing to Him and talk about Him and hear lessons about Him. And then also help each other in our private ways of praying to God and maybe reading the Bible, spending time together as friends, encouraging each other, helping each other in life, that kind of thing. So don't let any of these things really drive you away from the God that you say you believe in. It's amazing. You believe in God? Get to church and get with other people who can support you in those things. Okay, now, of course, backing up a little bit, some people find Jesus' basic conception of God sketchy at best. Okay, so remember in the first video we talked about not only different conceptions of God, but the concept or idea of whether or not God even exists. That's an idea today, that God does not actually exist in any meaningful sense, at least. And so they find Jesus' basic conception of God sketchy at best. I mean, Jesus obviously believed that God existed and that this God is a whole other category of being, but a personal being that you could know and that created you to know Him and to give ultimate allegiance to Him. So, yeah, we have some things that we'd like to share with you too, if that's kind of along the lines that you think. I mean, we would probably say consider some of the other ways that God shows Himself through the creation. Again, same idea with how you discern yeast, whether or not there's yeast in the dough. Whether or not there's God in this universe, this existence that we have. You look over at the counter, you see the dough rising, and you then know that there's yeast in the dough. Well, Here's one for you. So, like, if you get up in an airplane, you look down over all of humanity. One of the things you notice about human beings is that everyone, so this is universally true, everyone acts with something that we'll call moral obligation. And moral obligation only makes sense if there is God. So, what am I saying? I'm saying just like you see dough rising, you know there's yeast in the dough. Just like you see human beings universally, inescapably acting with moral obligation, so you sense that there is God. That's what you deduce without seeing him directly, if you want to say it that way. Okay, so what do I mean by this? Well, first of all, everybody thinks and acts with moral obligation. What is moral obligation? It is the idea of right and wrong and the conviction that you should do what is right and not do what is wrong. So that's just moral obligation, that you have an idea of right and wrong and that you must do good and not do wrong. And having said that, I want to make some clarifications so that we don't get confused. So hang in there with me as I knock out these four of them. So the first one is, it is true that people differ widely on what they believe is right and what they believe is wrong. We get that. Everybody acts with moral obligation, even though the terms of that moral obligation play out differently in different people's lives. Fine. Now, some people are going to say, no, that's not true. I don't even believe in the idea of objective morality. But if somebody says, I don't believe in the idea of objective morality, in other words, if they try to reject moral obligation, what they are really saying, if you listen to them, is, I believe it is right to reject the idea of moral obligation, and it is wrong to accept the idea of moral obligation. In which case, they are refuting their own point. If you say you refuse objective standards of morality, you refuse the idea of moral obligation, then you are saying it is definitely 100% wrong to believe in that concept, and it is right to reject it. See? Right and wrong. So nobody can get around it. So just keep that in mind. And by the way, if you ever talk to somebody who says, I don't believe in objective standards of morality, just watch their life or interact with them for a while. You'll find the lines that they inevitably draw. Everybody does. There's nothing different about anybody in this way. Man universally acts according to moral obligation. Okay, another clarification. It is true that people have a stronger or a weaker basic conception of ethics or morality and have the specific ideas about what is right and wrong based on how they were raised and how things are going on in culture and society. People are probably the most deeply influenced by those things. We admit that. That isn't a problem. We're not denying that. So we keep that in mind. I have no problem, for example, saying that I was introduced to a lot of the convictions I have and had the adaptation of these convictions modeled for me, in my case, in my upbringing. Not everybody's like that at Ventura Reformed or in churches that follow Jesus. But it was true in my case, and it's generally true in the world that people, at least initially, have deep patterns and ways of thinking about morality in general and specific rights and wrongs based on how they were raised and how things go in their society, their part of the world, the time in which they lived. That's true. Okay, the last thing I want to say is many people who deny what Jesus taught about God, even though they do that, we're saying, yes, they do openly embrace the idea of moral obligation. Sometimes when we talk about this, people say, well, you're saying people who deny that God exists or that deny Jesus' teaching about God are immoral people. And we're saying that as far as moral obligation goes, first of all, everybody practices it. Whatever they say they believe about God or think about God, everybody has a concept of moral obligation. So that we're all on an equal plane in that way. But it's also even true that people who believe in God and people who don't believe in God or have different definitions of God, they may share a lot of common ground on their belief about what is right and what is wrong. And they may get along well when they act together consistently with those ideas that they share. It's even also true that there are people who disbelieve in God who actually live more consistently and fairly according to standards that supposedly the people who believe in God promote and believe in. And there are plenty of people who believe in God who say they believe certain principles and standards who live in grossly inconsistent with what comes out of one side of their mouth. So I just wanted to make some of those clarifications as I come to the point. The point is that all mankind lives with moral obligation, and God is the necessary precondition for human moral obligation. What do I mean by that? Well, look, to say something is right and something is wrong, and I should do what is right and not do what is wrong, and you should do what is right and not do what is wrong, why? That's the question. Everybody acts according to this idea of moral obligation. But the question is, what makes sense out of that? Why? Why is anybody obligated to do what's right and not do what's wrong? So some moral philosophers, they think about this question, they've come up with ideas like, well, everybody knows there's these fixed moral ideas out there. For example, treat the person that's in your life in the way that you would like to be treated. And everybody agrees that's a good principle, a fixed idea that's kind of floating out there, and therefore you are obligated to obey it. Well, first of all, not everybody believes that and acts accordingly. But setting that aside, let's say everybody did. If all that there is some fixed floating principle out there in the universe that says treat others like you want to be treated, why am I obligated to follow it? Now, some people say, well, it's a rule and that's how the universe works. And if you step out of line, then it's going to be destructive to you. And my question would be, well, even if that was true, what if I want to make that trade and take my chances? Why am I obligated? You might say, well, it might cause you pain. You don't want pain, do you? Maybe I do want pain. Maybe I don't want pain. But again, who cares? Why am I obligated to follow some physical, non-personal idea like the universe or nature's way or fixed moral ideals? This physical, non-personal way of trying to ground moral obligation doesn't work. It's not consistent with practicing moral obligation. Another one that people come up with is they say, look, all moral obligation is, it's what your personal conscience tells you is right and wrong. Or moral obligation could be explained by a group of people coming together like a societal consensus, and that's what grounds moral obligation. Now remember what we said. Obviously people's personal conscience, their inner psychological voice has a massive influence on what people think is right and what people think is wrong. And by the way, I've said that's interesting because we always fight ourselves, if we're honest, as we're trying to work through issues and understand who we are and what we're doing here and what I should be doing, what I shouldn't be doing when I'm facing some kind of an ethical dilemma or trying to figure out a good trajectory for my life, where to go from here, what to keep, what to toss up, those kind of things. We're brushing up all the time against our own limitation, our own inner psychological voice. But then you put a lot of voices together and you have a society in general that looks at things a certain way, and we say that definitely influences people. But here's the question I have. If it's just me, or if it's just a big group of people who have come together in one particular culture or society that follow similar ways, why is anybody obligated to follow those things? People always say you should be true to yourself. One of the things I think about when I hear people say be true to yourself, which has some truth to it, I think. But one question I always have about that is be true to yourself. Why? Who's telling me to be true to myself? Am I telling myself to be true to myself? How do I know that being true to myself is a good thing to do? Sometimes I ask, like, what about the problems and the issues that I have? Should I be true to myself in those things? Or maybe I should work on them, maybe suppress the kind of things about me that aren't good. But anyway, my point is, how does a finite person obligate me or anybody else to follow what they think? If I live in a society that says you must do these things right and you must not do those things that are wrong, why is their authority something that obligates me to follow them? What I'm saying is that if what supposedly grounds moral obligation is abstract, physical, non-personal ideals, moral ideals, it doesn't have any obligatory power over me. It doesn't have any authority. It doesn't have any relational capacity. Why should I be forced to obey it? And if it's a person, a finite person just like me and you, why should they hold over on me moral obligation? I mean, I might want to listen to them and consider what they're saying, but I don't think you want me to judge you and by my personal rules. What right would I have? We're on an equal plane, right? So physical, non-personal ideals or an individual or a group of finite people, they cannot ground moral obligation. They can wreak havoc in my life maybe if I don't line up with what they want me to do, but we all know and agree and sense that parallel people cannot obligate others to do what they demand. That's ridiculous. We know that. What can, however, undergird moral obligation is what we could call an absolute person. An absolute person, first of all, is a person in that they have a relational capacity and they can have and demand loyalty from their subjects. And an absolute person alone can obligate because of their superior character and power. So to be obliged to do something, you have to be obliged to someone. There has to be the concept of loyalty. There has to be a concept of obedience. There has to be a relational thing that someone holds over me, someone who deserves that kind of allegiance. But again, it can't be a finite person because a finite person is on the same level that I am. So it has to be what we're calling an absolute person. It has to be somebody superior, somebody who transcends my whole category of being. That's why if you go down and look at that line, there is the Creator who is personal, who can receive obedience, who can oblige someone to follow what he says to do. And he has the right to do that because he is our Creator. We're under the line. We're the creation. He is transcendent. We are under him. He's a whole other category of being. An absolute person is just another definition of God, similar to the one who does not depend on anyone or anything else. So, I mean, it's sort of a challenge that we throw out to the people that are skeptical about the basic idea of God, find out what Jesus taught about God in a basic way, and they say that's sketchy at best. I want you to tell me what grounds human moral obligation that everybody practices. And I'm saying you look down at the human race, you see what they're doing, you see they're all acting with moral obligation, well, acting in a way that is consistent with a God who created them, the absolute person, the one who does not depend on anyone or anything else for anything. No matter how hard they try, supposedly, they can't get outside of acting with moral obligation because this is the life that we have that was created by God. Same like knowing that there's yeast in that dough whenever that dough rises. The dough, if it wanted to, could keep crying out, there's no yeast in me, there's no yeast in me, but the dough's still rising. Okay, I'm going to take a breath. I gave you a lot to think about, I hope. Thank you for sticking through the end of the video with me, and reach out to us if you have any questions or want to interact with us about anything that I've shared. Go to venturareformed.org, contact us through the website venturareformed.org, or come see us on a Sunday, 2 o'clock. You can find the information again on the website or on the socials, and we'd love to interact with you, work through with you your convictions about God and about the Bible and church. Get back in church, start trying to think about worshiping this God, and asking more questions about who you think this God is. We'd love to chat with you about that and work through those things with you. Thanks for watching. See you next time.